Musa, who was chairing B20 for energy transition and former CEO of Ryzen. Let's give a round of applause to Ricardo. We're also joined by Neneng Gunadi, Country Managing Director of Grab and one of Indonesia's leading female figures. Let's give a round of applause to Mbak Neneng. Now, I want to start with Ricardo. A bit of your reflection from the past, then I'll go to Mbak Neneng. As Indonesia just joined BRICS with Brazil, as the BRICS presidency was announced a few weeks ago that Indonesia has attained a full membership status, becoming a full member of BRICS. Then I'll turn to Cass to give a bit of a sense where the G20 and B20 South Africa priorities lies. Now, Ricardo, Brazil really is receiving global spotlight since last year with your B20, G20 summit. This year, BRICS summit, COP30, there's a lot of things going on. Now, you're chairing energy transition. Keen to hear, how do you see this priority has been building up from last year and this year? What's the role of Brazil, CNI could do to inspire climate action in the global south? Over to you.
First of all, thank you for hosting me. Thank you for my partners here. I think it's, when I talk about the energy transition and the role of Brazil, I always like to say that Brazil is not part of the problem, it's part of the solution. So when we are talking about G20 or COP30 now coming, it's a good position to be, because not many things that Brazil can be a leading, in the leading edge. So if you look into the Brazilian electricity market, production is almost 90% renewable. Yeah. If you look into what we did with biofuels, with ethanol, more than almost 60% of the consumption of fuels in Brazil are renewables. So it's a lot of good examples that Brazil can give. So what I felt on the G20 and leading the B20 is that we are more helping and trying to lead the way. So it's a good spot to be in this situation. Because we are going to host COP30 this year, it's the same thing. I think the challenge for me is how to people recognize what the South countries like South Africa or Indonesia can contribute and be part of the solution, not be part of the problem. Today, I think we have to be more bold in our statements to really show what we are doing. And that's I think it's a good forum to do that. The COP30, the G20, it's a good forum to do that. So what we try to do is to show how Brazil is performing and get rid of a lot of the mysteries behind, deforestation and what we're doing wrong. We are, as I said, I think we are part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Fantastic, and I think it's great to show Brazil leadership in the global south, right? Because I think we heard a lot of global north countries telling us what to do, but I think showing great success cases, I think would be great. We'll come back to COP30 later on, but now I want to turn to Mbak Neneng, who's been leading a lot in breakthroughs, financing, not only in Indonesia, actually, Southeast Asia, but I'm keen to perhaps tap into Indonesia first, Mbak Neneng. With Indonesia facing 150 billion annual financing gap for sustainable development, what's your thoughts around mobilizing this much-needed finance and achieving breakthroughs to address the challenge in global south, right? Indonesia and also neighboring countries? How can platforms like Grab really play a role here to address this?
I guess by digitizing merchants and also facilitating seamless digital payment and loans, it's empowered millions of MSMEs, because in Indonesia there are a lot of MSME, right? And empower them to participate in digital economy and give them the same opportunity with all the big merchants, right? So they can be able to be very, very successful, right? So I think it's good for the South countries, right? We can do that. Now, what is the relation with the finance? But if you think about it, with the digital payment and digital loan, yeah, because we have a lot of data, and I said yesterday, with technology, nothing is impossible, right? So if you think about it, we start with digital, the merchant, and then after that, we educate them. And then after that, the third point is how to help them expanding. And when expanding means they need capital. But before, capital is very difficult to get because to ask bank loan, you need to have collateral, usually, right? But because with technology and in our platform, then they can get a loan from us without any collateral. So that is, for me, is a big thing in Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia, where Grab is in 8 countries.
Fantastic.
Does that make sense?
Thank you, Mbak Neneng. I think it's great what Grab, a platform, can do so much for 8 countries in Southeast Asia, digitizing and also able to bring that impact to really scale, like millions of people, millions of MSMEs, and I think that's great. Hopefully, we can hear examples in Africa. I know that, and Latin America, but no, going to Africa, I know that CAS keen to make the upcoming B20, G20 summit, not just the G20 or B20 summit for South Africa, but also for Africa. This is an important year because after the G20, B20 presidency of Indonesia, then India and Brazil and South Africa, this is the last of the Global South to host such an important convening. Now, Cas, would be great to hear from Business Unity South Africa and as B20 Sherpa South Africa to hear your top key priorities and how do you bring the Global South countries together this year.
Okay, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to my fellow panelists for your inputs. So let me talk to what our president said actually at a special address to WEF 2 days ago. And to a certain extent, that drives the G20 agenda. And at the B20 level, we are trying to not exactly follow that, but use that as a guideline to actually drive the B20 as well. So firstly, obviously, climate change is a critical issue and will remain a critical issue. But in the South African context and in the African context, I think, and in many of the countries of the South, it's also meeting our targets, but also putting into place a viable and an implementable just transition pathway. Because we've got to move towards cleaner energy on the basis and in a way that actually grows our economies and doesn't actually pull our economies back. And if we don't do that, we don't have a good just transition pathway, we actually run the risk of doing that. We've done a lot of work there with Boston Consulting and others, and we are quite clear that there are significant job creation opportunities if we do this right, and so we've got to do it right. The second is that we need to ensure that we mobilize finance to fund sustainable development, and not just internally. I mean, South Africa has quite deep capital markets, and we raise a lot of money from there, and there are South African financiers active on the continent as well. But I think that to leverage private sector capital, to also ensure that there is a more level playing field in the world, in emerging countries and countries of the South leveraging capital from multilateral institutions and so on. I think our president has been absolutely clear that we need to ensure that special drawing rights, for instance, there's a reallocation from developed to developing nations. There's a need to actually relook at the entire global financial system and what role multilaterals play. And our government has been absolutely clear about it. So whole financing, global finance, the role of multilaterals is a critical issue. And then we're also looking at, and it's germane to the continent as well, We've added an 8th task force in the B21 looking at industrial innovation, manufacturing, beneficiation, and so on. Again, critical for the continent, critical for our country. We need to value add our resources, our minerals, and export finished products instead of exporting raw minerals and then importing finished products. And so that's a critical issue. So those are some of the issues that the government have raised. I'm just looking at your critical priority sectors, and those talk to us. So new renewable energy is critical. I see my co-chair has just walked in, so I need to be careful what I say. New renewable energy is critical. We've got a task force on food security. We've got a task force on digital economy. We've got a task force on skills and employment. We've got a task force on manufacturing. So it talks to a lot of what Indonesia is talking about here. And what we want to do is, I mean, this is the first G20 and B20 hosting in its current form on the continent. Yeah. Comes back to us in 20 years' time. We hand over to that place in the north, as I said, America, in interesting times. And we want to come out with recommendations that are implementable, that are action-oriented. We're talking to our colleagues in the state, the American Chamber of Commerce, to see if they'll buy into tracking implementation during their term as well. And that's what we want to concentrate on. Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. And I think this is an exciting year for G20 and B20 presidents in South Africa. Let's give him an applause. He has a very tough job to do. But thank you for leadership. And your tone is super inclusive to the whole of Africa, as well as Global South. So a huge thank you again. And I think alignment between G20 and P20 very much needed. Our chairman of Indonesia Chamber of Commerce and Industry is keen to support BUSA and also keen to work to ensure we bring strong Indonesia business delegation to make P20 summit this year a big success. Now, if I may turn to Brazil, to Ricardo, and specifically looking at some climate actions. And then I want to hear more perhaps from Bu Neneng on what's Grab doing on sustainability and EV in particular in Indonesia and the region. I think would love to hear that. Now, Ricardo, I mean, Cass mentioned about mobilizing finance. In reality, Bloomberg NEF studies said about 85% of capital and finance mobilized to Global North for renewables and any green investments. Only about 15% gone to Global South countries, to Latin America, Africa, and so it's a very small portion. Now, would love to hear your thoughts around this and what can COP30 do? Now, of course, COP26 in Glasgow, last year COP29 in Baku have their own flavor. Would love to hear from Brazilian CNI as the business association. You are really a big champion and driver on energy transition and for the whole of Brazil. What you would like to see at COP30 as the G2G negotiation will take place this year?
That's a great question. That's, I think, the major challenge. I'll give you some examples. Today, we are producing ethanol in Brazil, but the U.S. has so much money, and they created the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, that is creating some distortions on the allocation for climate change. So I'll give an example. We are producing ethanol in Brazil. Our ethanol go to U.S. We put the ethanol on a truck, go into a vessel, go to Florida, put another truck, go to a railroad, go to the middle of U.S. We convert that into sustainable aviation fuel, and that sustainable aviation fuel goes to Europe. Yeah. It's crazy because every 1.7 liters of ethanol, you produce 1 liter of sustainable aviation fuel. The best thing to do would be, why not produce on the origin, where it's produced, so you avoid all these. But this distortion is created because the finance is not going to the right place. Exactly. The finance is going to the wrong place. And why is that? Because people are trying to protect themselves. Now with the Trump administration, I think it's going to be even worse because they will try to bring more and more. And this creates a problem because, as I said on my previous talk here, our countries are part of the solutions. If we have access to the finance much faster, on how we can fight climate change, much, much faster. When I was working on the private sector, for me to go to an investor, private investor, and talk about my investment in Brazil, it was easy. The difficult part was talking about a developing country. Because for them, the risk to go to a developing country is there. So I think the part of, you asked about COP30 and the governments, is to put the climate change in a different way to protect the investors, the private finance to go to those, because the projects are there, good projects, great returns, but the risk they are trying, and then you have the distortion. I think the way all the countries should see, I think the climate change is the first thing that is really truly global. Even COVID, in my view, was not a global. It was a global problem. Many countries, they could solve their problems just by shutting down. But if Norway put 100% electric cars, what will change for them on the climate change? It's a global problem, has to be done in a global way. So I think COP30 is a way for trying to bring the governments to try to make more sense on the subsidies that they're doing to finance climate change. It's not easy. It's very easy to academic to talk about it, but to implement is hard. It needs the effort from the governments. The way the private sector should act, the CNI and the institution, is to help bring solutions. That's why the B20 has a big role on trying to help the G20 find a way. But I'm saying all that, but it's very difficult to implement, very difficult. When you talk to investors, in the end of the day, those subsidies from developed countries, the Green Deal in Europe or the IRA in US, creates huge distortions. But we have to keep trying.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. I'm going to ask questions to Mbak Neneng, and we'll come to the audience if you have any questions from our Global South business leaders here. Now, Mbak Neneng, you've been active in Grab, obviously, in building ecosystems, right? And part of this ecosystem and partnership is also advancing sustainably. We're very impressed with some of the partnership Grab is doing, throughout the ecosystem, but in particular on the sustainability front. We know Grab is also, quite active in the EV front. What's some of your stories? Do you have any successes and challenges, perhaps, that you'd like to share?
Okay. That's a great question. To be honest, we start trial the EV car 2019, the first in Indonesia, right? And then after that, after the car, but at that time it's very expensive. Yeah. So if we use it for ride hailing, the economic doesn't work. Then because Grab has a goal by 2040, it's going to be 0% emission. Yep. So we start with two wheels.
Oh, two wheelers, yeah.
Two wheels EV. And it's interesting at that time, it was 2021, 2021. We need to educate the people because the people, they are so afraid using two wheels EV because they think if it's flat, then they got electric shock. It's so funny, but it's real. Then we educate them, and they love it at the end. Why? Because cost efficient because it's just charging. And then second is no noise. It's very silent. So they're very happy. So the thing is, we talked to Ricardo, right? In two wheels in Indonesia, a lot of Indonesian manufacturing do it with the raw materials from China. So it's pretty cheap and pretty okay. Quality is getting better and better now. So in Indonesia, Grab now is the biggest users. We have 11,000 electric vehicles, which is two wheels as well as four wheels. And Ricardo asked, how come four wheels? Now it's actually affordable. And the good thing is the government is actually helping to make it happen because the 0% import duty for EV, and they ask the manufacturer to create a manufacturing company in Indonesia. And the government also create a battery manufacturing company in Indonesia. So from that perspective, it's very good. And I think we just have to do it together. That's from EV perspective. From the food delivery perspective, if you think about it, when you buy food, we educate the customer and we ask the customer, hey, do you need cutlery? So a lot of people now, they don't want
They don't need it, right? Yeah.
They don't need it. And to be honest, millennial and Gen Z, they really care about it. They care about the environment. So that's great. And the other thing is also we help educate them as well that, okay, if you don't use EV, if you don't get EV, you can like donate a certain amount of money, and we will put that, use that to plant trees. So all is end-to-end, what we can do, how we can also educate the customer, how can we educate the merchant to make sure they're all aware and they care about green environment at the end of the day. So.
Fantastic, thank you, Mbak Neneng, in sharing some of these emerging developments, and I think that's great. And hopefully we see more 2,000, 3,000 EV two-wheelers, cars soon.
No, well, by this year, we will probably add another 2,000 cars.
2,000 cars, wow.
And then two wheels is going to be even more. So hopefully we help Jakarta to be clean.
Yes, clean air is
And not only Jakarta, a lot of cities in Indonesia.
Of course. Now, can I come to the audience? I think we have time for a couple questions, and then we're going to have one round of questions with the panelists again. Just want to ensure that we get questions. Yeah? Maybe we can help with the...
Hi. I'm Kevon. I run an events and communication agency in Amsterdam. I help governments to communicate better. I'm really curious about these three governments here from Western point of view. We don't really hear much about what you guys are doing because there's a lot of noise, obviously, a lot of information, overboard of information. But you're obviously doing interesting things. What are you struggling with in communication-wise to communicate these amazing things that you're doing right now? And how do you think in Western Europe we should be adjusting to your style? Should we adjust to your style? Or should we come to you? Or should we come to Davos to hear these things? Because communication, end of the day, is marketing. And without marketing, I don't think it will go far no matter how much innovation you do. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Kevin. Do you want to...
I can start here. I think you touched a huge point. For me, is we at least in Brazil, we do not communicate well. I'll give one example. Farming in Brazil, there is a law that you cannot use 100% of a farmland to plant. If you are in the developed region, you can only use 80%. 20% has to be protected. If you go to the Amazon, then it's even worse. So when you compare a farm in Brazil, more than almost 60% of the country is protected farmland that you cannot use. It's something that the farmer could make a lot of money, but it's protected. Then you go to Europe or US, you have zero protection. The guy can use 100% of the farmland. And when you go into the debate about you have deforestation, we have much less deforestation than America. But that's not communicated properly. For the Brazilian government, we're not communicating that properly. When I go to a meeting with an investor, I spend the first 20 minutes explaining Brazil, explaining that the Amazon region is 3,000 kilometers away from the production of sugarcane, has nothing to do with that, but it's all about communication. How to do that? I think these things that we're talking about, copy, G20, it's a good environment to show, to talk, but I think it's a matter of, I think climate change is bringing some opportunities for those countries to show off a little bit more. On the other hand, economics are important and politics are more difficult, more challenging. So I see in Europe, the farmers, France, are really concerned about that and shouting. So it's very tough. But for me, what we have to do as a country is to keep going to the forums like Davos, to other places, and keep bringing the information, to inform more, to talk more about it, and be more proud. I think when I talk to the Brazilians there, we have to be more proud on these things to really talk. Normally, developing countries, they are not proud. They always talk about their problems, not about. That's true. I think that's true. We are not very proud. I've been to Indonesia several times. Amazing how they do on the protection and deforestation compared to other countries, on a relative basis. But they always talk about the problem, not the solution. I think it's our problem. We have to be more, and together to be like, I like the word the global south, because we have a lot of things in common and we have to talk more. But I think the climate change, as I said before, is the first time that we are really have a global problem we have to fix together. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But it will drive people towards, but it's communication. I like what you said. I don't have the solution. I'm just talking the same thing that you are. I think we lack good communication.
Yeah. On Brazil, what I realize is that you guys are fueled by hydro and more renewables than many other G20 economies. You guys actually, your energy mix are much cleaner than.
No,
that's a new fact.
But I'll give an example. I was working for a company that has more than 500,000 hectares of forest under protection.
Yeah.
That's more than Netherlands has as a country. One company. They have more forest under protection than a country. It's 1/3 of the forest of Italy. One single company. And then we don't talk about it. But
yeah, a lot of facts. But
I often see the problem with that is that you have people that are way close to the topic. So we are called in, my agency is called in because people in governments are way too close to the topics that you mentioned. You're too emotional, so you don't see the grand picture. I come in as a foreigner, I see things very differently. I shape the communication strategy and I make it much more sexier, catchier, and effective in a shorter time. I think that's maybe the farmer example. I think that's a beautiful example that I didn't know about. So.
Yeah.
Maybe let's hear from South Africa.
Okay,
this is very important for you.
So let
Indonesia.
me start with something Ricardo said earlier, that if you look at the three countries here, we are part of the solution, not part of the problem.
No.
In my view, the problem is beginning to manifest itself in the north.
In the West, yeah.
Okay, and in the West. And I think that, one, I agree with Ricardo that it's our problem. We need to communicate better. We need to talk about the good stuff that's happening in our country, not ignore the bad stuff, but promote the good stuff that's happening in the country, which we certainly are doing in South Africa. Because in the last 3 years, we've had a good government-business partnership that's actually showing results, and we're promoting that. But at the same time, I think, and I say this with the greatest of respect, I think that significant part of the media is still very biased toward the West. So, poverty, unemployment is not just a southern problem. It's a global problem.
Yeah.
But it will always be promoted as a problem in developing countries, right? And it's those sorts of stuff. I mean, I was on a panel recently where somebody said, well, if Africa shows that we're protecting the Constitution and we have open economies and we are transparent, investment will come. I said, well, don't ask me to open my economy when in the north they're becoming protectionist. Okay, so have level playing fields and have the same standards. And I think those are the sorts of things that media needs to look at. So I think that we need to do a lot of work, but I think the global media fraternity needs to ask itself whether it's beginning to recognize that the world is changing.
Yeah. And I think putting people like you, Cass, right, at the right platform, speaking at the right time and getting your priorities heard is important. You will be amazed how many panels are just white Caucasian, sorry for this, but like we need diversity. We need those in Global South to be represented and to be heard, right? So that those really, they really need to understand where we are, right? Maybe, Mbak Neneng, what do you hear? I mean, obviously Indonesia also has a lot of perceptions.
Well, I guess, sorry, I'm not from the government, I'm from the private sector.
Why am I, by the way?
I just want to be clear that one. But actually, I agree with Ricardo and Cass, right? I mean, a lot of time we talk about problem, And there are many things that Indonesia has done, and we just have to promote that, right? A lot of new regulation that is created by the government that is good. It's to achieve 2060, because Indonesia wants to achieve 2060 0% emission, right? So I guess that's what we need to do, and there are a lot of things that we have done, to be honest, right? So we need to see half full, not half empty. That's what, for me or for the business, I think what we have done and we continue to do is to make sure everyone in the country really aware and really play a big role to make sure that Indonesia become better, right? So. But I agree, communication is number one, even for company, right? We communicate a lot about what we have done, how many tons of emission that we already save, how many kilometers that using EV and all those, so that everybody knows. So I think that's...
Thank you, Manane. I think communication is certainly one thing that we all can. Maybe just one more questions from the audience before I run one more round. Any? Konrad, it's good to see you.
Hi, Konrad Jagodziński. I'm from Brand Finance. We are a brand evaluation and strategy consultancy. I think just to add to this discussion, I think, because communications is one thing. It's how you package what you already have, how you talk about what you already have. But I think what's even more important is what comes before that, which is a coherent narrative about your country, a coherent narrative about what you stand for, your values, a coherent brand for your country that is perhaps not known elsewhere, that might be obvious to people within the country, but has not been codified, has not been properly defined, and has not been built into a strategy for communications, for marketing, for go-to-market investment or tourism agencies. And I think that's probably what's missing is it's the relevance of what's going on in those countries to people in other countries. It's not just look at what we're doing, but also trying to build those links and trying to touch on those points that people would really find important and would really find helpful. And there's various countries that are doing it excellently, and South Africa is one of those examples, obviously, and others increasingly. But I don't think there's enough being done, and I don't think there is enough really waking up to this, especially in the global south, because the global north is great at selling themselves, but the global south still, I think, need to be waking up to that. And it's great to see all of you here portraying the coherent messages from your country. And I think that's really important. Thank you.
Good. There is no question there, but I think it's a good comment. Yeah. Now, maybe let me, before I go back to the audience again, I want to hear what success look like by the end of 2025, and hopefully all of us can come back to Davos in January 2026 and sort of reflect. So maybe we'll start with Cass, right? I think, you have an enormous task to bring together, G20 and B20 together. What does success look like by the end of B20 summit that you'd like to see, Cass?
Yeah, so look, we have established a mechanism to coordinate with our government on the G20 so that we try to be aligned as the year progresses and as the policy development process progresses on critical issues relating to policy and so on, and we'll do that. But I think that for us, certainly from a B20 point of view, what we would want to see, we want to ensure that the biggest economies in the world, represented by the G20 countries, understand what the opportunities are on the African continent, understand what the opportunities are in the global south, and actually financiers and others have a deeper and a more nuanced understanding of risk factors in those countries. Okay, my view, and I was at an investment conference in Cape Town hosted by 91, and a number of people representing investors in that room, for the first time I heard, actually says we put risk premiums on certain countries without really understanding those countries, okay? And so we would want to have a process that at the end of that, and if we're sitting here next year, says, well, there's a better understanding of how these countries work. There's a better understanding of what the risk factors are and what the real risk premium should be, if there should be one. I think the second issue is that we need to also ensure that some of the multilateral financial institutions in the world also understand that while countries in the South need to look at various issues to make themselves more attractive, investment and so on, that the multilateral financial institutions also need to understand that they need to ask themselves whether they are actually working in a way that promotes that. So we'd like to influence some of those things. I think on the energy stuff, again, I mean, we certainly in South Africa, we made significant targets. We've set targets. We intend meeting them. But again, I'd like to be sitting here next year and saying that there's a better realization of what some of the geopolitics in the world is doing to us meeting some of our targets. And it's not countries in the South, there are some countries in the North that are actually having difficulty meeting targets because of Ukraine and so on. Well, when we say we're having difficulty meeting targets, don't say you guys are cuckoo. There are real reasons why we're having difficulty. So I think that, you know, in this changing world, in the geopolitics that we're dealing with, and I think that the real message we would want to send across and talk about here is that, guys, and that's our theme. It's for the B20. It's inclusive growth and prosperity in a cooperating world, okay? So let's cooperate. It's not the South or the North. It's us together with some very, very common problems. And we've got to cooperate to deal with those problems, with a level playing field, with treating each other with respect, and understanding each other's situations, and knowing that if you mess up here, you file the consequences further down the line.
Thank you, Cas. Now if I turn to Ricardo, building from your successful P20, G20 presidency of Brazil, what would a success look like by the end of, you know, the BRICS summit and COP, UNFCCC 30, you know? We reached COP 30 now. You know, that's an important milestone.
Yeah, I agree with. I think the success. I think the biggest challenge now is that this energy transition, different from the previous one that we had, from coal to wood to coal, from coal to crude oil, it was always cheaper. This one is more expensive. I think that's the problem now. Is I don't see the energy transition happening without support from the governments, from subsidies, and that's where the money is from developed to developing countries. So financing is really a key element. So the progress on the financing will be, for me, the most important thing. Because when I was reading the B20, I was seeing countries, everyone have great projects, great ideas, and financing is a big challenge. So if we have any, and I'm not, of course I'm a dreamer, but I don't think it's going to be sorted out, but if there is a progression, I think on the last COP, we had already a progress of, I think it was $300 billion that they committed. It's very small, but it was there. I think that's the path, is how to make sure that the finance for projects on developing countries that have the lowest cost to reduce, to fight climate change, would be the most important aspect. So if we see evolution on that, I would be already happy on that sense. That's why when I was invited on this panel, I said that that's the best thing to talk about, how to make sure, what are the challenges between getting the finance. I think he has a...
Can I just
yeah?
respond to that comment?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. The name is Mkolisi. I'm the co-chair of B20 South Africa. And I really want to latch on to that issue of the financing, but also linked to trade, okay? Because what is emerging and also the commitment of the global north to finance this transition, okay? Because those commitments are not being met. But when they are presented from a financing point of view, they put this risk premium on top of that because they deem it as a risk country. And then when it's time to trade, they say, because if you've not met your obligation, we're going to tax you, okay, carbon tax, to trade to our economy. So you find yourself in this virtuous cycle that, you know, they don't make the commitments, funding commitments for the transition. But when they do, it's not at a rate that is going to help an already an indebted country, okay, which is trying to struggle with sovereign debt issues. And then at the same time, you're saying, well, we're opening our markets, but if you want to trade with us, we're going to put and tax you because your carbon commitments are so. So to me, that is probably at the center. Something has got to break this virtuous cycle. And until we create a much more evenly playing field, because we're going to continue coming here, you're going to continue going to COP, we're going to continue having this argument, but the question is, where and how do we break the cycle?
We don't want to reach COP 50, Ricardo. You know,
A good point. And you know that for me is, I think, recognize one of the biggest debate that I always had was establish a cut date to talk about emissions. So of course, developing countries, they say, no, let's get 2008 as the cut date. For me, as a developing country, no, I don't want to get 2008. I want to get, no, even 500, whatever. Because if you look at how much emissions each one has already done over since the creation of Europe or US, whatever, that would be the right thing to do. And that, maybe to break the cycle, to recognize that. Then the tax on carbon may be different. But that's such an important discussion. What's the challenge for developing countries? The most reputable companies that give certifications are in Europe, are in US, so it's tough. That's not an easy debate. For me, when you talk about break the cycle, would be how can we recognize when the emissions started? If we put 1,000 years ago, then would be great. Then would be the tax, carbon tax would work. If you get 2008 as the starting point, then it's tough. Why are you going to talk to the Chinese? They never had. The other day, I saw a number. I don't know if it's, so please don't quote me on that. The amount of energy that US spent just by heating water for spas and pools is the entire consumption of energy of Africa. That's the size of the difference between emissions and consumption for countries. So for me, to break the cycle is to have a date that say how we're going to see how much emissions was done in the past and put that date back. But that's not even on the table on the COP discussion. It's tough. I don't have the answer.
Yeah. Now, I do want to turn to Mbak Neneng and, you know, getting your comments and your thoughts on Indonesia. Now, Indonesia has joined BRICS. Indonesia is acceding or is starting the process of accession to OECD. Indonesia already a founding member of ASEAN, a member of APEC, a member of G20, you name it. Is there any downside being in too many clubs, Mbak Neneng, or is there any positive upsides? Welcome thoughts from a business leader, and you know, how can Indonesia work together, you know, with the rest of perhaps fellow neighboring countries or global south to have a narrative, or are we confusing ourselves? What's your thoughts?
To be honest, my thought as a business leader, I think it's great to be part of BRICS and OECD and APEC and all those. Why? Because we can learn and we can discuss and share experience, and we can work as one group, as you mentioned, right? So we will understand what's the policy that needs to be improved and all those. I know some people talk about why it's too many and all those, but I always think about helpful. Yeah. Because we will not join. I mean, the government will not join if they think it's not beneficial for Indonesia, right? And for business people, at the end of the day, how can we make sure Indonesia achieve 8% per annum growth? That's what we want.
Absolutely. Great. We do want to ensure that we have room for a bit of networking later on, but maybe we can squeeze in one more questions from audience. If anyone would like to ask any questions to our business leaders. No? Great. Well, to that end, I think we can wrap up our discussion. We do have a little token of appreciation, Alifa, we can give. This actually a nice, a beautiful craftsman from Papua. So if I invite, maybe if Tim can help Alifa to, there you go. But Neneng also can get one.
You already have one?
Well, we can give to others, I'm okay.
So one, maybe we can one to Cass.
Thank you.
From Kadin, Indonesia. One from. We have two more, right? We should give one to Busian Melosi. We have two more? No. No, this is the three. Oh, sorry. I thought we had.
No, seriously.
No. Well,
It's fine.
do you want to open and see what's in it? There you go, so you could see it.
I can promote Indonesia to all of you.
Beneran cuma satu loh, the last one.
No, it's fine.
Okay, we'll get you.
It's
Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thanks again, and let's do a quick picture. Let's do a quick picture. Let's do a quick picture here, yeah? Okay.